What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Yogz podcast. This is episode 5. So this is the first episode we've done since the tragic killing of George Floyd in Minnesota. And today we really want to delve into not just the circumstances around George Floyd's murder, but also, the response globally to racism and what we've seen from, social media, in the news, people we know, and also really just discussing our own experiences growing up as minorities in England and how racism has impacted our life and how we kind of see the racial landscape of the UK. So much to get into on this episode, right?
100%, man. Like you said, I mean, you couldn't have introduced it any better. This event, the tragic passing of George Floyd after being sort of apprehended by the Minnesota Police Department. Yeah, the video was really hard to watch, but it was a similar flavor to a lot of the other things that we've seen in terms of police brutality to African Americans. There's a multitude of cases come to mind, when the police are using unreasonable amount of force, or there's in terms of the individuals completely outnumbered, to how many people are restraining them. And, to see this everyone knows the details of the incident. I'm sure everyone's seen the video. But you're right. This event has kind of lit the match and this flame is, it's kind of spreading around the world. I mean, I can only speak really for the UK in terms of, what the sort of sense and the feeling is in here. And I'm sure you can, talk about the sentiment that's felt across the US, particularly in California. But I'm hoping that there's, positive change comes off the back of this. It feels like there's some serious momentum behind this. It feels slightly, I'm hopeful that this is not just a kind of a flavor of the month kind of protest, and then this is something that's forgotten about shortly after. It feels certainly different. It feels like there's, like I said, a lot of momentum behind this. So yeah, you're right, a lot to cover in this episode.
Yeah, I love the imagery of the lighting of the match that spread across the world, because that's what it feels like. It feels like there's real social change coming. And I mean, so just to jump into the George Floyd situation in and of itself, this actually comes off the back of us discussing another kind of high profile killing in the US, Ahmaud Arbery case, right? And I mean, on the episode, we spoke about kind of systemic racism in the US and demonization of Black people and the laws which allow these sorts of things to happen. But this is not the same thing. This George Floyd, this wasn't a civilian killing another civilian. This was, first of all, was a police officer whose response is to protect and serve the community in which it works, right? Mm-hmm. And we saw one, definitely, and potentially 3 other police officers completely complicit in killing a man with their bare hands, right? And so something I've been thinking about a lot about this case, right? And the racial dynamic we're going to definitely get into, obviously. Mm-hmm. But do you think part of the reason the reaction has been so strong to this case is because it was a barehanded killing? Because, in the US, they're used to people getting shot. They're used to that sort of level of violence. But there's something so graphic about somebody being killed with their bare hands.
No, 100%. I think that definitely has something to do with it. The manner in which this man's life was taken from him, and I think more so for me, at least what hit me hardest was he was pleading with this, like you said, this officer is, he's sworn in to protect the inhabitants of the place that he's, sworn in to protect and serve. And for this individual, George Floyd, to be, begging for his life, saying he can't breathe, saying, calling out for his mother who had actually passed away. I think all of that, and going out on camera, literally, due to the pressure that was, on his neck. I mean, I've been in that position, in jiu-jitsu, if someone's on your back and they're putting pressure, because he was putting pressure on his spine and, having someone's knee on your neck. So I've felt, another person's whole weight on my back, and it's absolutely, it's crushing, soul crushing, literally. It's for someone who, he was outnumbered, 4-1. There are probably an array of different ways that situation could have been dealt with that didn't result in his death. But I think you're right. To what you said initially is that, yes, I think it's the manner of which this man's life was taken from him, and the moment up until that point before his passing, where he's pleading with this officer to relieve the pressure that he's putting on his neck, telling him he can't breathe, and calling out for his mother who'd already passed away.
So graphic, and like you said. In fact, while the incident was being filmed, one of the men that was there observing was pleading with the police to stop. And he said, "I'm a jiu-jitsu instructor. I teach at the academy." right? And he actually had an interview shortly after, and he said, like, I teach jiu-jitsu at the academy. Do you know the effect of this? Like, I train with you guys. You're not taught this in the academy to do this. We spend our free time learning about chokes and learning about how the body responds to chokes and pressure. So you can relate to how it feels to have somebody on your neck. And like for 6 minutes, it's just unfathomable that the fact that this police officer could even think that this would be an acceptable way of restraining somebody with his hands in his pockets, all of his weight on the neck. It's just shocking. It just points to bad policing. The fact that they felt the need to do this to someone who wasn't even resisting arrest. It just points to so many bad issues within the police force, aside from the institutional racism. And yeah, so this incident happened, and thank God for the internet and social media and the age we live in, because this incident was beamed across the world. And what we saw was very intense protests in Minnesota, which then really spread across the whole of the US. And out here in Oakland, it was Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night of protests, and the response was amazing. Oakland is a historically black city with its own issues in the past about police brutality. So the people here were just, absolutely appalled and really came out in force to show solidarity. What we saw kind of as an offshoot of that was a sort of outbreak of looting, right? And I think the looting's been used to almost discredit the protest.
Yeah, in many ways, yeah. It's a lot of people feel a type of way about the looting, and I have my own opinions on it. And but I mean, I understand what's the Martin Luther King line. It's the riot is the language of the unheard, basically. And I feel you can't expect for a group of people that have felt marginalized for a number of decades, and they don't feel as though they have a platform in order to sort of voice this and to be heard. I think it's foolish, really, to not think at any point there's going to be an absolute outrage, a point of outrage. And I think this is not the first time we've seen something like this. I think of the Rodney King incident, 20 odd years ago, where again, African Americans rioting, going absolutely crazy over the of a fellow African American. And it's I just hope that, just like I said at the beginning, I just hope that after all these incidents, I hope there's some positive reform, both in the way people view the world and view each other, and in a more sort of legislative sense, in that there's actual reform, and hopefully there's some sort of systemic approach to removing some of that systemic racism that's not just in the US but across the globe.
Totally agree. So obviously, due to the nature of social media, we have to endure, maybe endure is the correct word, endure everybody's responses, right? So, we don't live in a world where we're only seeing what we kind of think. We're only going to be exposed to people expressing opinions that we don't agree with. For some reason, a lot of people have taken umbrage with these protests, and they're using the fact that there was looting to discredit the protest. Now, personally, I don't agree with looting. I think it's unnecessary, right? But if you look at the looting and say, oh, well, Black Lives Matter, but they shouldn't be looting. If the looting is detracting from the statement of the protests, then you're getting it all wrong, in my opinion, right? And the sort of polarization of this issue is what really blows my mind. So many people are quick to just discredit the movement or say it's unnecessary or racism isn't that bad. And it's like, you've seen it on camera. Like, and the fact of the matter is, take the racial element out of the killing. Do you want your police force to use that force on anybody? Do you want your police force to be empowered to do that? If you're a person who's not on the side of Black Lives Matter for whatever reason, and you're seeing that, well, surely you can't think that's part of a civilized society anyway, right?
It's not just it's not just people. Again, I agree. I've seen people who have used the fact that some of the protesters are opting to loot as a kind of way to detract from the original point of the movement. I've also seen people talking about George Floyd himself, in the fact that he may or may not have been intoxicated at the time, or been taking drugs, or any number of things that have been used to kind of discredit the whole point of the movement. And it's just such a moot point. Even if that was the case, like you said, is that the type of way do you think the police department should be treating its the people it's been sworn in to protect and serve? Do you think people should be treated like that? And again, it's the other thing with the the whole all lives matter as opposed to Black Lives that matter. That's another thing that I've seen. And that one completely blows my mind as well. It's like, people aren't trying to say that because they're asking for Black Lives to matter, it means that in some way, this is some type of literally you look at the word matter. It's not like black lives are superior or black lives are this. It's literally just matter, as in like to be valued in some way more than it is now. And someone I don't know where I heard it from. I can't recall the bit where I heard it from, but it was like it's the same thing as like someone saying, oh, there's a house. This house is on fire, and the fire brigade comes in, and is about to put water on the houses, and he goes, "Oh well, put water on all the houses because, or like, what about the other houses? Why are you taking care of this one?" He goes, "Yeah, I know, but this house over here needs help. Let me try and put the fire out here. Yeah, no, but what about the other houses? Well, yeah, I know they're not on fire right now. Like, I need to go put this fire out. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, it's exactly the same thing. If there's going to be someone that's going to try and argue the case that there's a disproportionate amount of violent, the way African Americans and other ethnic minority groups are treated by the police, not just by the police, by other institutions in and around the world, if they're going to say that there is absolutely no evidence to support the fact that there's in terms of treatment there isn't a disparity, then I don't want to do business with you. I can't relate to you. I can't talk to you because due to the ubiquity of mobile phones and the fact that they're just able to capture this stuff, I think it's shining a light on it now. That stuff's always been there. And now we're seeing it more. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I am on the whole thing.
This isn't up for debate anymore, right? If you're going to try and debate the presence of racism in institutions in the US or anywhere else, I can't engage you in conversation because you're letting your biases, you're going into this prejudice from the start for some reason. And I don't want to start casting aspersions on people and saying people are racist, but if you're refusing to acknowledge this and refusing to engage this and look at the facts, then you're a fucking idiot. Like, to put it bluntly. To put it bluntly. I mean, honestly, man. What this has created is now created this window where people can actually talk about race in a much more open way. And so, if you I engaged extensively on social media in the last week in conversations about race, sharing my own experiences, and talking to and seeing other people in my network who are non-black minorities also talking about how anti-black racism is in their own cultures, how racism is in their own cultures. And it's been really refreshing to see these conversations being had, because I think people of our age group maybe haven't had these conversations with their parents and wider society. So is there anything in the last week or so, any kind of conversations in your own life that you've had with anyone where you feel like, you might have learned something, or you've been able to help them learn something?
Seeing the fact that people have made a conscious effort to, and I think that's our duty at the end of the day. Our duty as the next generation is to leave it in a better place than when we found it. And I think having those conversations with your family members or your friends, just increasing awareness and visibility of things they might not even know. Your friend doesn't have to be a bigot to be unaware of these things. That doesn't make them a bigot. That doesn't make them a racist. It just makes them someone who doesn't know. And it's your duty and there's nothing with being wrong either. People can have views that are wrong. Us as a society, we've made a decision that this is not the way we need to do things. We need to change things. And 100% those conversations should be having. I think for me, one thing I'll hold my hands up and say that I haven't actually. Well, I've had a conversation with my friends, but they're more in the same sort of standing as I am. And I think that's a conscious effort on my part to surround myself with people who are in that kind of way. And that's I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but that's kind of how my life has naturally developed. Like, I don't have a lot of people in my life that are close to me that are going to have those types of viewpoints, because I generally wouldn't want to sort of hang around. But on your point of in sort of other ethnic minorities where these prejudices exist, 100%. I want to take. I'm taking it upon myself to make sure I'm having those conversations with, whether it's not necessarily my parents, because I think they're slightly more. They see the world slightly differently, but there's other members that are kind of in my family, not in my family, that I feel like I should be having talks with, and making sure that at least I've done that, making sure that at least I've raised my point on that, because I've made the mistake of not being vocal when I hear things that are not acceptable, things that haven't sat right with me, and for whatever reason, social pressure, just awkwardness, I haven't spoken up about it. And I've made a kind of promise to myself that if I do hear those things, or I know somebody thinks that certain way, then I'm going to try and make it a duty for myself that I have those types of conversations with those people.
I love that, bro, and I think, and that's the beauty of the response that we've seen, is that people are now able or feel able to engage in these conversations, which are a difficult, race is a difficult thing to talk about, right? And you know, I think I've always been hyper aware of racism. You know, growing up with a dad like mine who was always very vocal about racism, especially with regards to the police, he'd always sort of put me onto it from an early age. And I think I've always had this sort of approach of calling shit out when I see it or when I hear it or when I feel like it's directed at me or anybody else, for the most part. In the workplace, I find, like, you know, let's just get this clear. Everything that's racial is not racist. So calling someone an effing N-word and then beating them up, racist, right?
I think we can agree on that.
We agree on that one. Can I touch your hair? Or where are you really from? Or, you know, you're so exotic. So those people don't know that's problematic, right? And I guess the term that's being coined for that is microaggressions, right? Now, like, I'm gonna try and paint this picture. Like, you know, these microaggressions, they're like, you know, they're the seed, right? So you plant all these seeds and it grows this big tree, which is racism, right? And the fruit that comes off of racism is a black man getting killed in Minnesota, right? So you know, you look at the seed, you look at the fruit, you can't always see the connection, but we have to sort of stop these seeds being sown on a day-to-day basis. I've had incidents at work, even out here in California, where, you know, I think, I can't believe they just said that, and I'll go home and I make my network carry the burden, my loved ones, my friends, my family. Can you believe he said this? Am I crazy? And that's got to change, right? Because, and why am my people carrying the burden for what, you know, somebody has said, even if it had no ill intent? I've decided to myself, like, even when there is something that's a microaggression, I am going to point it out to that person, because, like you said, Souph, sometimes people just don't know. You can't blame people for not knowing. We spoke about the show we love, Only Fools and Horses, right?
Yep.
And listen, back in the day, they were using the word packy. They were using, I think, wog. They were using darky, terms that are just, you know, have no place in society. But if you grew up in the 80s seeing that, it's completely normalized, right? So, and I had a friend reach out to me and say, I'm going to try and read what he said. My friend Ash, he lives in South Korea now, right? And that's actually where I met him. And he's a lovely guy, man. You know, I've never seen any sort of discrimination or sort of white supremacist ideologies coming from him. But he said to me, like, racism's so embedded in the language that a lot of people don't even realize that they're being racist. Until I was around 16 or 17, my family would refer to ordering from a Chinese restaurant as getting a chinky. And people who were mixed race were half caste. I was lucky enough to have friends from different backgrounds to correct me and help me to learn the better use of language in support of people. That's beautiful to me. That's beautiful to me, because he grew up in a situation where this sort of problematic language was normalized. He was open-minded enough and fortunate enough to have friends from different backgrounds and then learn from those friends and correct this behavior. And now these sorts of microaggressions, I'm always sympathetic for people that don't know, but the time has come for people to be made aware that even these problematic microaggressions have to stop too.
100%. You have to as well. I think it's a duty on the person as well. Granted, when you hear these things, sometimes they can be frustrating. Sometimes they could anger you, whatever type of response, and they're not necessarily doing it to elicit that response from you. But I think it's kind of the duty on the person that's hearing that, and when they broach that subject with that person, to do it in a way that's not combative, or at least it comes up across a way that's not combative, just in an educational way, to say, like, look, I get you might not know. Perhaps you know, just to quiz them on why it is they use that language, and if there's a better way, you know, explain firstly what's wrong with it, and then hopefully that person is going to learn from that, and they're not going to use it again, like your friend Ash obviously has. And I think it's important that you know, you don't want to, because as well, like, there have been times where I've talked out about things, so if I've heard something, and then, you know, in typical British fashion, it's like, oh, chill out, mate, you're having a laugh, mate. Do you know what I mean? It's like, do you know what I mean? You're only having a laugh, mate. It's like, well, no, we're not having it. You're having a laugh. Like, you're having a laugh. you're fucking having a laugh, mate, for like talking about it. You know what I mean? It's just like that's the thing. Like, I think you need to broach the subject in a particular way, and you know, if it can be avoided, not to turn combative.
Like they say, right? You catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar, right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and that's it. Like I'm not advocating for, like, you know, go out and hug a racist. We're talking about these sorts of indiscretions that people don't even realize they're committing, right? These sorts of indiscretions that people commit and they don't even know they're doing wrong. These are the people that you need to say, hey, man, look, this is how this comes across. This is what this actually means. This is the origins of this. And this is why you shouldn't say it. And I think that's a really constructive way to approach the subject. I have my own issues with race, and, like, you know, if someone saw you and me walking down the street, there's a very good chance they'll think we have the exact same background, right?
Highly likely. Yeah, it's happened, I'm sure.
It has. And you know, for anyone that doesn't know our backgrounds out there, you know, I'm mixed race. I'm mixed race. My dad is black. He's from Trinidad. My mum is from Cyprus, right? And Souphian is Moroccan. His parents are both Moroccan. The way people understand race and the very linear ways in which they look at people and sort of categorize people racially has always been something that I've found a little bit weird, right? Because, you know, when there is some sort of ambiguity, I'm using air quotations, ambiguity about your racial background, people don't really know how to treat you, right? They don't, you know, well, you're kind of black, but you're not really. Does that mean I can say certain things around you? I'm not really sure. And it kind of falls into this situation where people are constantly trying to assess what they can and can't say around you. You know, I'd be the first to admit, if you probably never met someone half Trinidadian, half Cypriot before, so why would you know what one looks like? But, you know, I've had people racialize me in different ways. People say they think I'm white. People say that I think I'm black. People say that I think I'm, as recently as, you know, this week, I was at a protest in Oakland and I got interviewed by the news and they edited me. Of course, they edited me. On the YouTube comments of the video, somebody said, the reporter only asked white people what they thought about this. They went as far as asking a white British man about a black American problem.
Man, like, firstly, you got to stay away from those YouTube comments, man. That is a fucking cesspool.
It's the price of fame.
First of all, stay the hell away from them, man. But yeah, that's crazy that and do you think it was your accent?
It is. Oh, of course. The accent's a big part of it, right? And I fully acknowledge that. You know, to a lot of people in America, British accent equates to Prince William, right? That, you know. But guess what? We're not. There are people who are not white and live in England, are from England. But, you know, and I also admit, like, that, you know, society draws very distinct racial lines in their mind. And, like, to be black, you have to have a certain hair texture and you have to have a certain complexion and or whatever it is, right? So maybe he looked at me or she looked at me. I don't want to assume anyone's gender, and they thought I was white. But that wasn't even the part that I took the most issue with in the comment. Let me say it again. You even went as far as asking a white British person what they thought about a black American problem.
Yeah.
So
I didn't even pick that up on the first time hearing it.
Right.
Yeah. That is a big problem, isn't it?
Yeah. So you think that somebody being killed by your police force, irrespective of their color, is a black American problem? Well, it's definitely an American problem. It's definitely a problem you have in this country. It's just not a problem for black people only. And that lack of awareness to see this as a human rights problem, right? Mm-hmm. Because if George Floyd was Asian, if he was white, if he was Hispanic, and he was killed the same way, it's still someone being killed brutally by the police. That should be the bottom line here. This is a human rights violation. And even if you don't want to admit, even if you've got your head in the sand and you don't want to admit that there's a racial issue, view it as a human rights problem. Because if all lives matter, right, then all lives matter, right? Like, shit, what are we doing here? So yeah, I mean, I say all that to say, like, you know, I've had my own sort of mischaracterizations racially, and it happens a lot out here, and it's something I've come to sort of navigate in my own way. But, you know, being from a mixed family, I think, you know, where a lot of my friends who are like yourself, who are minorities, but non-black minorities, they have their own sort of cultural things. Like, you know, my friends who are South Asian have to have these conversations with their families, right? Because, you know, in Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi culture, there's a lot of anti-black racism, right?
100%. Yeah. 100%.
And so these conversations are being had now in the East Asian communities. A lot of my friends out here who are, you know, Vietnamese, Chinese, Japanese, they're having these conversations with their families now as well. For me personally, sort of being mixed race, I feel like I have more of a duty, because you know what? I have family, right? I've got family who are white. I've got family, cousins, aunties, extended family who are white, right? And I'm sure they love me. I know they love me. But because you love me, it doesn't mean you can't be racist, right? And do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, 100%. I get what you're saying. It's like yeah, it's the classic thing in England, isn't it? It's like, you know, when I was growing up at school, I remember there's times when I'd be told like, "Oh yeah, not you, you're all right. It's the other ones."
Yeah.
And it's that classic thing, isn't it? It's like, well, I appreciate the fact that you've included me in this little group of yours, but it's like, yeah, no, that's a problem, man. Like, what do you mean the other ones? Because that's what my mum, my dad, like my brothers, are they cool as well? What about my aunties and uncles? Like, where does it stop? Like, where is this? You know, the other ones. Like, what do you mean by that? And yeah, no, 100%. I can get what you mean, and that I'm sure that would extend even to our own family members where they have their prejudices that they're not aware of.
Because, you know, during the issues with Brexit or further back, you know, the sort of response to ISIS and, like, you know, Shabina Begum, the young girl who went across to Syria, there was a big debate about that publicly. And I had family members who I thought were kind of espousing sort of, you know, those borderline statements, you know, those borderline viewpoints. I think, well, you sound a bit racist. And if you weren't my family member, maybe I would overtly call you racist, right? And then I've seen, you know, some of my older relatives on Facebook very supportive of the Black Lives Matter movement. So they don't see the connection between those two struggles, right? They don't see those two things as connected. And I think, like, I want to use my position of being in a mixed race family, and I encourage everyone else who has a mixed race family. Listen, I've got friends who are mixed race, have a black parent and a white parent who've got no connections to their black parent. They might not have even met their black parent, or they're the only black person in their family. But if that's the case, can you imagine how isolating that would feel, Souph? But if that's your circumstance, now's the time to use that position to actually connect with your white family and say, hey, look, this is how it makes me feel. When you say this, this is what it really means. And I think, you know, that's a really important conversation to have.
Not for this to turn into a counselling session, but we touched on our own experiences with this thing. And I think it's kind of healthy. At least for me, I found it quite cathartic to kind of talk about some of these things. Because in the last week and the last couple of weeks while this has been happening, there's been things that I've been thinking about that happened whilst I was growing up. And at the time, there's, like you said, there's instances that are much more overt. And, you know, there's absolutely no disputing the fact that, you know, you're someone who's being racist to you or anything like that. But then the trickier ones is that, you know, the implicit, small offhand comments that perhaps, you know, could be brushed off quite easily. You called them microaggressions. That not necessarily a term I was familiar with, but it's yeah. I mean, in your experience, is there anything on the topic of racism in your own experience? Is there something that sticks out to you, a particular experience that you've had that's kind of, you know, impacted you?
Oh, absolutely, bro, definitely. And so I think about this a lot. I've been thinking about it a lot this week. And you know, for context, I grew up in a household. You know, my dad had a very hardline approach to racism, and I think it kind of, like I said, it heightened my awareness of it at a young age. So, you know, even from young, I always felt a sort of othering. And I think something that you and I have in common, and a couple of my other friends I've spoke to this week, is that we're different because we're minorities, but we grew up in predominantly white areas, right? You have such a different relationship with racism when that's your reality, because I've got friends who grew up in like East London, Northwest London, where everyone around them is like them, right? They're black or brown. So they had very little exposure to racism, right? They actually didn't have the experience of dealing with that I did, or maybe you do, or other friends would have done. I mean, I've got a laundry list of them, but I mean, I can go back to as far as like being 9 and starting at a new school and being chased around, being called a nigger, which I'd never heard the word before, being called an Arab, which I definitely never heard the word before, people trying to beat me up. And I mean, when you're experiencing that at 9, it has a definite effect in the way you see yourself in that community, in that world. But man, you know, countless situations, even in university, when I first went to uni in a place like Portsmouth, where there's a lot of issues there. All the time, you get people even drive past you. I had someone spit on me. I was going to a date with my ex-girlfriend. Some spat on me out of a car. You nigger, spat on me out of the car. But I've had like friends I had a friend in Portsmouth who was like honestly beaten to an inch of his life in a racial attack. There's so many, man. I mean, you know, there's the ones that are, like you said, like the overt bad ones, but it's just the little things. So if it's the little things, like you said, you know, am I being treated differently because of this? Am I being treated differently because of that? And yeah, like I said, man, even in my own family, there's been things which I won't get into on here because frankly, I don't want to embarrass anybody. So I don't want to embarrass anyone in my family network and make them feel bad. But there's been things that even to this day, that I haven't, that I'm not prepared to sort of forgive. And this week has actually brought some of those things back to the surface. And then, so yeah, man, so many issues, so many things that I think have sort of shaped the way I see the world and I see myself within the world. What about you? Have you got anything like that stands out?
Yeah, man. I mean, for me, and like you said, it's growing up and I saw that when I went to university and when I was surrounded by people who grew up in inner London, and they had a completely different experience growing up. Their schools they went to, the inner city schools or some of the other schools that they went to, they weren't really a minority, which was not the case when I was growing up. I grew up in Sussex, so like south of England, and it's like where I grew up looks very different now, 20 years ago. But yeah, there was things and they impact you in a way that you don't necessarily really realize. Or I think for me, the biggest thing is that, like you said, there were some of the things that I didn't actually know what was going on, or I didn't know what they were talking about. And it didn't become apparent to me until later on in life. But like one sticks out, like opening up, sitting at lunchtime at school and the kids were like, "Oh, your lunchbox smells like curry." And it's like, well, I would be like, well, my mom's, I don't think I've ever eaten curry. Do you know what I mean? It's like, well, that's the thing. It's just like, and it's things like that. Or it's, I remember as a kid, like I used to hate having curly hair.
Yeah.
I remember I used to want to gel my hair down. And like and at the time it's like, well, I just wanted to fit in.
Yeah.
And then I remember pleading with my mum. I didn't like having curly hair. And then when I look back, I'm like, fucking hell, that's because like I just wanted to fit in, And it's like it's stuff like that you don't really think about until you get a bit old and you become a bit mature and you reassess those moments. But it's things like that have been, coming back up to the surface, as you say. And as well, I want to point out, that about the whole non-combative thing. It's like I used to work for this insurance company, and it was for like claim like motor insurance claims, like car breakdown stuff, and it was for home insurance as well. And I remember, so I introduced myself in a call, like, "Hello, Souph speaking, blah blah blah." This old guy, must have been mid to late 40s, maybe early 50s, talking to him. Some sort of claim on his insurance. I think it was for his boiler. Go through the whole process, take all the details, blah 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 blah, and then come to the end of it, and he goes, "Sorry, mate, I didn't catch your name at the beginning of the call." And I was like, "Oh, my name's Souph." And he goes, "Oh, where are you calling from then?" And I was like, "I'm calling from." It was Surrey, that where the office was. I was like, "I'm calling from Surrey." He goes, "Surrey, England?" I was like, "Yeah, England." He goes, "Can I just say your English is absolutely fantastic?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, it's my first language." Like I was trying to like make it like maybe this guy was just having a slow moment, and then I realized like he genuinely was confused the fact that someone with a name like Souph is talking to him in the Queen's English. And he's like, "What the hell is going on?" And I was just like, "Well, yeah, my name's Souph, yeah." And he goes, "Well, how come you don't have a name like George then?"
Fuck me.
And I was like, "Do you know what, man? We need to end this call," because I was like, "Yeah, it's crazy though." But that's the thing. He wasn't combative. He wasn't, obviously, making an insurance claim on your boiler is probably not the best time on that call for me to address some of the racial issues that that in society and why his view is slightly warped. And it probably wasn't the best time for it. But like, that's what I mean. He wasn't combative. He was genuinely, just not in the know. He didn't seem like someone who was angry. He just literally seemed like he was confused. So it's and it's things like that I think that is rife in the UK. It's things like that's these aren't people who are, yes, we have our fair share of the overt racism, but I think it's we have a lot more in the UK. It's a lot more of the complicated stuff. It's that sneaky, it's more covert. It's a bit more, it's more implicit,
Yeah.
That's what we have here, which presents its own problems, really.
So one thing I have been sort of dragging up in the last week has been some cases which I have always thought about some instances which I've always thought about that, you know, were either local or national news, and I've been sharing it on Facebook just to remind people this happened. And I'm not talking about things like the Stephen Lawrence case, right, which we all know about and we all know the racial implications, but I'm talking about, you know, I remember in 2004 when England played Portugal in the Euros, right? That was around the time where I guess movement of people was happening. So like a lot of Portuguese moved to England to work in certain parts of the UK, and there was a Portuguese pub, right? Which when Portugal beat England, the pub was attacked, right, with women, men, and children inside. It was attacked. 35 windows were smashed. They were hurling racist abuse. They assaulted people. 10 people went to prison, right? That's racist. That is overt. That is like, we don't want you here. Get the fuck out. Why are you here? And you can attribute it to football violence, but I mean, you know, the reality is that was just an excuse to be able to tell these people, fuck off, we don't want you here, right? I brought up the case of Charles de Menezes, the Brazilian student that was shot in the head at Stockwell Station.
Of course, yeah. That was amid all the terrorism stuff, wasn't it?
Right. I mean, the reality is, like, you know, he was sort of, you know, he looked like you, Souph. He looked like me, right? He had that sort of ambiguity where, oh, you might be from Brazil, but you might also be a Syrian terrorist. Like, you know, because, you know, in that strange way where people don't know where to place you, they for some reason attributed him to being involved in the terror, 7/11 terror attacks. He had no links, and they shot him in the head at Stockwell Station. You can say it's racism, you can say it's not racism, but like that's problematic, and there's a racial element to it, right? There's a you know, so these things happen. I'm banging my drum, and I'm letting people know, like, you know, we're not off the hook here in England, right? My friend Leighton, we've been kind of having these conversations for a long time, right? And we always talk about media representation of minorities, particularly black people, but minorities more broadly, right, in the UK, right? And when you look at the way Lewis Hamilton, if you go on Lewis Hamilton's Instagram, it is a fucking cesspit, right?
Oh, yeah. Please, carry on. Sorry, it is.
You know, the comments you hear about him, like, oh, you know, why are you dressing like a gangster? Because he's got earrings and braids, right? The sort of denouncement of his Englishness because he, you know, pays taxes in Switzerland or doesn't pay taxes. The same as Jensen Button, who's the blue-eyed boy over, right? But for some reason, Lewis Hamilton's conduct is constantly called into question. Raheem Sterling, you know, his conduct.
Ashley Cole.
Sufyan, thank you, brother. You read my mind, because actually another one of those issues that I brought up, right? The Ashley Cole situation. So I sat in a pub in 2012 with the same friend Leighton. We sat there watching England play, right? Packed pub. Everyone there's white. Do you know what I heard, Souph? I heard, fuck off, Ashley Cole, you black cunt.
Fucking hell, man.
No one said anything. We looked at each other. No one said a word. Ashley Cole, one of the best players this country's ever produced, constantly demonized, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he cheated on his wife, but so did David Beckham. That's not the issue. The issue is that he was a black footballer who was, so he's a mixed race, right? He's a mixed race footballer who was successful, who was making money, and when that is your descriptor, when that is your identity, you're arrogant, you're cocky, you're flashy, right?
Yeah.
And that's the way the media in the UK portrays like minorities, especially black men, right? And it's been like that for years.
We see that in the sport that we love to talk about as well, in terms of the combat sports. Like in the UK, it's like, yes, Amir Khan, it doesn't do himself any favors. Yeah, it doesn't do himself any favors in the press. He does, you know, but he won. Was it a silver medal in the Olympics?
Silver, yeah,
for Great Britain. Yeah, he won silver medal for the Olympics for Great Britain. Yeah, and when people talk about Amir Khan, they're like, I just don't like Amir Khan. You're like, well, why? What is it about him? Oh, it's just, you know, it's mouthy. Same thing with Floyd Mayweather. Don't like Floyd Mayweather, mate. Yeah, he's good. Yeah, he's all right, but he talks a bit. Anthony Joshua, yeah, and that's why you see like other athletes like Anthony Joshua. He needs to, you know, he has this sort of humble bravado because he kind of seen this. But Conor McGregor, oh yeah, he's a laugh, isn't he? He's funny, isn't he? He's you know, likes to talk some smack, and that's really cool. They like that. And I always wonder, like particularly in the UK, they like to rally behind. They don't necessarily show the support of, you know, Amir Khan was never going to get the support that Ricky Hatton got. That just wasn't going to happen. Maybe we see a slightly different thing with Anthony Joshua because there's a lot of people in the UK who support him. But that type of thing is absolutely, and when you quiz these people on it, like, what is it you don't like about them? They never really give you a substantive answer. as to why it is they don't like that person. Why they're not fans. And you wonder how much of that is due to the color of their skin. That's something that I've noticed as well in combat sports.
Combat sports is an absolute cesspit for it, right? And I mean, I'm sure it is just a representation of the broader society, maybe a microcosm, but it does feel like those sort of sentiments are more concentrated in combat sports. I mean, I've been loving Stipe Miocic's tweet recently. You know, the one that on Instagram, he posted a blacked out tile for Blackout Tuesday. And one of the comments was, "Hey, Stipe, I think you forget most of your fan base is white," and it shows in the comments below.
Yes,
and he responded with, "You know, I don't care about my fan base. I care about the world which my daughter has to grow up in." Mic drop. But yeah, I mean, I've seen Ariel Hawani being absolutely dragged in his comments for supporting the Black Lives Matter movement. To be honest, I can't speak to it in a UK context, but there is a very strong undercurrent of like sort of the more right-leaning, ex-military, pro-cop sort of mentality in the jiu-jitsu MMA community out here. You feel it in gyms, man, 100%. So I'm a little bit ashamed of it. You know, you said, you know, sports is a great way to sort of pick up on racism, right? Because even as a kid, you know, I always identified with the black players, right? You know, I always had an affinity with like Ian Wright and Andy Cole, and they were the guys I really wanted to be like. And they were never represented in the England squad, right? They never made it in the England squad. And you know, I was an Andy Cole stan. I loved him. He was my guy. And he was always snubbed for the World Cup, and he would be top scorer in the league, and he would be this and that and win these trophies, but he would never make it into the England squad. I had a narrative in my mind that this was because of his race, right? And whether it was true or not, when you start to see that, and when you start to feel that, it's really hard to go back from that, man. And you start to feel almost like an outsider in your own country.
That's you know, I'm really glad that you said that, because there's been instances where I've walked into, like, it could be a pub, for example, and there might not be anything that is going on in terms of like everyone in that room could be mild mannered and, you know, not racist in any sense of the word. But there's been times when I've walked into, and I'm a rational guy. I think I'm a pretty rational guy. But there's been moments that I've walked into like a room like that, and I've instantly felt uncomfortable. Instantly, it's because that like I'm the other, you know. And I know that's, you know, then there hasn't been anything that has happened in order for me to feel that way. But you're right. There's enough that's happened previously that makes me question my own place in a room like that, and and something like that is very difficult to wash off, because like I said, like these men that I walked into the room, they didn't do anything to, yeah, they might have looked at me or stared at me, but you know, and I'm walking into a pub full of people, yeah, that's perfectly normal for people just to look at new people that have walked in. But for me, you know, I'll take that, I'm like, oh my god, yeah, I'm walking into a room full of white English people, do you know what I mean? I'm just like, oh, should I leave? Or these are thoughts that are going into my head that, are they rational? I don't know, like probably not, but because actually nothing is happening in that environment for me to question my own safety or anything like that. But it's you're right, it's once you see the world in that way, or once you've experienced, you know, racism, it's sometimes very difficult. It's a very difficult smell to wash off, like you know, from yourself and the way you see the world.
And yeah, it basically isolates you, right? You know, you become hyper aware of any sort of microaggression, and then you internalize it, and then you start to feel like, I don't belong here. This is, you know, you then other yourself in a way, right? And I've been thinking about this in the context of because I just got through watching this TV show called Caliphate, which is a Swedish TV show about the radicalization of kids in Sweden. And this is where it comes from. So, you know, radicalization doesn't come from because Islam is evil. It comes from disenfranchised young people who feel like, oh, I'm a kid born to Algerian parents in France, and I don't feel like I belong because I've been constantly told that I'm not French, right? It comes from kids in Bradford being told that you're not really British because you're brown and you speak Urdu at home. And well, it comes from marginalization, and I think it stems from racism. It stems from that sort of othering. And yeah, man, like I completely feel what you're saying. I completely agree with what you're saying. It's something that, like, you know, speaking to my own experiences, yeah, I've always sort of felt that. And I can be honest, like there might be times where I am sort of preemptively jumping down someone's throat because I think, yeah, you're coming at me sideways for whatever reason, right? I remember in the 2006 World Cup, and I keep bringing it to football. It's the fourth football reference I've made, right? But it's just such a very easy way to be around like the mainstream culture in the UK. It's such an easy entryway into it. But yeah, 2006. I don't know if you remember, but Trinidad and Tobago qualified for the World Cup, right? When I was a kid, right, when people would say like, oh, I'm Spain or I'm Italy or I'm France, I'd always pick Brazil. And I picked Brazil because it was the closest good country to Trinidad, because Trinidad were never going to make it to the World Cup, right? Of course. When Trinidad made it to the World Cup in 2006, I was overwhelmed. I was so happy. I thought, wow, like, you know, I was born in England. Don't get me wrong. I was born in England. I grew up in England, but I always felt like, you know, Trinidad's my team, or Cyprus is going to be my team. You know, so when Trinidad made it, I was so proud of them. I had a Trinidad and Tobago shirt for the World Cup. And lo and behold, who got matched up? England and Trinidad, right? So bear in mind, bruv, I went to a pub during the World Cup. Of course, it's going to be all England fans, right? I wear my Trinidad shirt. And the match wasn't even sort of close, right? Trinidad were huge underdogs. England are a powerhouse. And I got abused for 90 minutes, man. I got names hurled at me. I got people screaming at me, call me a cunt, tell me this, fuck you, this, that, and the other, right? And I thought, I was amazed. I was amazed at the sort of like intensity of the vitriol that I was receiving, right? England win, end of the game. Everyone's like, fair play, mate. Good game. Shake my hand, shake my hand. And I just thought to myself, if England had lost, I'd have probably got beaten up, right? That was such a sort of eye-opening moment for me, man, because I realized like there's very little room for you to sort of embrace your home culture, or, you know, the culture of, you know, if you're first gen, there's no room for you to sort of be connected to that and still retain some sort of Englishness, because for years it's been something that hasn't been able to happen, right? You're either English or you're not, basically, right?
Yeah, man, and that's the thing in the UK that's also very confusing, because we have this split between, like in America, if you have African descent, if you're from that, you know, from that descent, you're called an African American. If you're from, you know, from another part of the world, like let's say China, you're Asian American or whatever. In the UK, there's a distinction between the country that you're born in, and I know this because, you know, it's Great Britain. It's not just formed of England itself; it's formed of, you know, other countries as well. But, you know, when you say I'm British, yeah, and what does that mean? Like, there's this clear distinction between English and British. You know,
yeah,
like someone like me, I was born here. I've lived here all my life. I always used to refer to myself as British, and I think most people would. Because, you know, my parents originally born in Morocco, and although I was born here, I never saw myself as English, because, well, but that's what I should be, because I mean I was born here, right? So if I was born in England, then why aren't I English? But I never referred to myself as English. If I ever dreamt of doing that, my parents would be looking at me sideways, like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean? You're Moroccan?
Yeah.
I was like, am I? Well, I wasn't born there, so like, what? How am I Moroccan? I'm Moroccan by proxy. Like, I'm Moroccan by the fact that because you're Moroccan and you were born there. Like, but there's very little of me that's, apart from this color of my skin and the fact that I can talk the language and some of my behaviors, maybe my sense of humor, or whatever, and my cultural understanding. Yeah, maybe some of that's Moroccan, but for the most part, like, I would say I'm pretty English. There was one time when someone said, where are you from? And I was like, no, they said, are you English? And I said, I'm British. And they're like, where were you born then? And I was like, England. And this guy was an old white English British guy. He said, well, you're English then, aren't you? And I was like, yeah, I guess I am. I was like, but that did, and dude, that happened. I was 24 or like 23. Do you know what I mean? How did I go so long? Like, just seeing those things completely and, you know, that's the thing. Like, when I'm on the census, yeah, and I don't want this to be in, you know, I get it. This podcast is about a platform where I can voice my opinions, and hopefully people can listen to it and not switch off for 1 minute in. But you know, it's the small things as well, like the fact that when I fill out an application, I'm an other. You know,
say it again.
It's things like,
say it again.
It's things like that. It's things like, well, I don't even know what to fill out. You know, like it's madness, man. It's madness. Like, it's just, there's a lot of things, and in some ways, I'm really, this whole situation, like I said at the beginning, I hope there's real positive change to come out of it. But I think for me, before I start going out to change the world, like, I need to clean my own room first. there's a lot of things that like there's a lot of things that have happened in my life that have impacted the way I see things, and there's people that are close to me that I can impact and hopefully change their opinions. And I think that's what I'd like, you know, to come back to the original point of this episode. It's like, yeah, 100%. Like, I think if anything, you don't have to be a protest, you don't have to do all this, but if you can change the opinion of one other person, and hopefully, or you can bring them around to the way of thinking that, hey, we're all equal, and there are some people in this country, both in and around the world, that don't feel like they belong or they feel marginalized, and hopefully we can all agree that that's not a good thing, and we should be making steps to change that.
The idea of people being marginalized, making the wider community realize marginalized people is a problem for everybody. That really does start at home for all of us. So we have our experiences, right? We've grown up, you know, looking how we do, having our backgrounds in the UK, right? And obviously we, you know, just due to the sheer sort of power and voice that America has, you know, we kind of see the plight of particularly Black people, but other minorities in the US. One thing that's been really interesting about this last week is my opportunity to have an insight into my friends who are Black across the world, in different parts of the world, right? Who are experiencing variations on these themes, but with a local twist, right? And how those things have changed. And so I've got a friend who is Dutch. She grew up in Amsterdam. She's her dad is from Suriname. He's Black, and her mum is from Indonesia, right? So she's mixed, right? And she posted a status on Facebook the other day, and it really struck me. It's like, wow, this is like, that's when I really realized this is a moment for everybody. This isn't just an American problem. This isn't just an American thing. This is an opportunity for all of us to sort of voice our opinion and voice our experiences and try to educate the people around us. And she basically said, you know, like pretty much the same, you know, if you're complaining about protests, you know, and you think the protest is the issue, then you're missing the point completely, because racism is the issue, right? But then what she goes on to say, which I thought was brilliant. She basically went to say, unfriend me if you still believe that Zwart Piet is a part of the tradition. If you think my roots is a reason for a dress up, then you need to basically delete me. Now, that's a uniquely sort of Northern European thing, the Zwart Piet. And he's this sort of mythical character that is supposed to be like a sidekick of St. Nicholas, Father Christmas. And around Christmas time, Zwart Piet will come out, you know, dressed up alongside Father Christmas. And it's basically a guy in blackface, right?
Fuck.
A guy in blackface.
Okay.
And this has been around since the mid 1800s, right? It's a guy in a curly afro wig with blackface and big red lips, like a fucking gollywog, basically. But this is a part of like Dutch and I believe some other countries' tradition, right? But oh, hang on, can we not just agree that like maybe it's time to end this tradition? Because the origins of the character was that he was a slave, right? Zwart Piet was a slave, was a Moorish slave. And so the fact that she was able to voice this to her wider community and say, hey, look, it's time for this shit to end now, because yeah, maybe we're not getting shot to death or beaten to death like people in America are, but actually this is a problem to us here. And I just thought it's such a unique sort of twist on it. And we've seen similar things with, like, you know, over here in the US, the sort of Confederacy monuments, right? There's the argument from white America that, oh, this is history and we should keep it. But then people are like, well, no, because this history directly correlates to my ancestors being fucking murdered and enslaved. I can understand this history, but like, can we just not agree that it's time to bury that history, or like to not at least not have monuments and flags about it, right? And you know, so interestingly, out of this, the U.S. Marine Corps has announced that they're going to ban all like Confederate flag imagery on their bases, right? So you can't have it on your car or anything. It took a week for that shit to happen. You know, that is progress. And we've seen in Bristol today, the protest in Bristol, they toppled the they actually removed the statue of like a slave trader in Bristol, and they dumped it into the harbour, which, you know, I was getting strong Saddam Hussein vibes from that when they pulled that shit down and threw it into the water. But like, yeah, it's saying like, you know, the guy's name was Edward Colston. It's saying that, yeah, actually, like, this isn't acceptable. We want to move on from it, and like, we deserve to be represented fairly by this country too. So it's been really interesting to see globally how these little symbols that are distinct to each country are affecting people, and how they are either being eradicated or they have been eradicated. And I think that's great.
No, I couldn't agree more, man. like I said, it does feel that there's some momentum behind this, and this movement has, spread like wildfire, really, across the globe, and that makes me happy to see. There are some voices, really, like that you hear on whether it's on the news or on an Instagram post, that are like very clear and very clearly articulating what they feel needs to be done and what they feel the issues are and where we need to see improvement. And that makes me really happy to see. And I'm hoping that all these movements and all these efforts to shine a spotlight on these transgressions, it's just not done in vain, man. And I hope that we see some proper change off the back of this. That's really, I'm hoping that that's the case. I really do.
Absolutely, bro. I think, like I said, some of these small steps have already happened. So I think, we're on the right track. I mean, I've even seen petitions to change the curriculum in England to actually acknowledge, there's this thing called the British Empire, and it wasn't all about like, oh, look, we've got sugar now, and oh, look, we've got tea now. It's like, oh, actually, we're actually killing people in these places and taking their land. Mm-hmm. So it's like, cool, like, oh, I'd love to learn about that. I'd actually love that to be taught in schools. And now it's on the agenda. People are actually saying like, this needs to be in the curriculum. And maybe sort of when we have kids, that they're going to be in a school where they're taught about that. And it's not just like, oh, well, the Anglo-Saxons were pretty cool.
Yeah, I do think our current education system is doing a bit of a disservice, because it does feel like a lot of this is just like swept under the rug. Like, oh yeah, we know what happened in India, Pakistan, all the division of land and all the people that were killed and all that. Yeah, we'll just forget about that. Is that cool?
Yeah.
All the stuff that happened in Nigeria, and it's important for people to realize that in the UK, they kind of take the position of being brought up and living in the UK for granted, and the fact that the UK and Great Britain, and the US, it's only in the place it is off the backs of all these terrible, horrific incidents that have happened in history, where other people and other nations are still feeling the catastrophic events that happen there, whether it be in India, whether it be in Africa, whether it be in wherever else. And I think in the UK we have a little bit of a tendency to kind of take that for granted and not see the fact that there are still some people, England as well. I think England as well. They're really unaware of the fact that all of our neighbours hate us. Like literally everyone. France doesn't like England. Ireland doesn't like England.
Yep.
Republic of Ireland doesn't like England. Scotland doesn't like England. Wales doesn't like England. England hates everyone. Everyone seems to hate everyone. You know what I mean? It's just like, and I think people don't really realise why that is. And it's because of just this complete lackadaisical, like unaware of their own. And yes, I get it. Well, I'm not trying to hold you responsible for shit that happened 100 years ago. I'm not trying to do that, but at least have some kind of, when you're talking to people, just be a little bit aware about how you're being perceived, how what you're saying is how they're gonna take what you're saying to them.
It doesn't even have to be back 200 years. It doesn't have to go back to slavery. It doesn't have to go back to the first time an Englishman set foot in Australia or India and killed a brown person. There's a sense of it in England with English people that what they have was built off their own back, was created. My granddad fought in the war for this. My granddad didn't go to war so you could protest and graffiti on war memorials about Black Lives Matter. That is a rhetoric that I've heard endlessly, right? My granddad this, my granddad that. And you know what, Souph? It's bullshit, because they don't know that their granddads weren't the only people there. They don't know that their people were not the only ones shedding blood. Context now, right? There's a photo that we have in my family from 1917, right? And it's my great grandfather. So it's my grandmother's dad, right? And he was born around 1899, 1900, right? In Trinidad. He's a black man. And this picture is of him in his uniform, right? And he he fought in World War I in the Middle East, like Palestine, Israel. Well, there was no Israel then, in the sort of Palestine, Jerusalem area. Right, he got a bayonet wound, right, and he went back to Trinidad, lived his life, whatever, right, lived his life out. He shed blood in World War I. He shed blood for a country that doesn't care about him, doesn't acknowledge him as British, and in fact, he didn't even have a family member born there until '86 when my sister was born there. I'm the first male born in England from my family, and that was 70 years after he went to war, right? But to hear the narrative from Billy down the street, my granddad fought the Germans for this country, and you're here trying to take advantage of it. Well, no, you did. This is not all you. It was something that was created by all of us and all of our family. I'm not saying, by virtue of the fact of having a family member in the war, you deserve to be in England more than someone that doesn't. But I'm just countering this narrative that you have some sort of entitlement more than anybody else because you had family members in the war. And I don't know if you've seen the movie 1917.
I haven't yet. No, I haven't seen it.
Yes, it's a great movie, and it's a great visually. It's an amazing representation of World War One, right? And you know what? So in that movie, it actually features black and brown people. So West Indian and Caribbean, soldiers from the Caribbean, soldiers from the Indian subcontinent, right? And online, I'd see people saying, "Well, fucking, trying to get diversity quota, right?" They didn't even know that these people were there, and it's mad. Isn't it? But the only reason they were there is because the director Sam Mendes, he's of Trinidadian descent, and he had a grandfather who was in the World War One, right? So the only way that narrative was even put out there was because someone had a direct connection to it. People are not even aware, and that's a big part of it. It's this sense of this is my country because my people fought for it. But that couldn't be further from the truth, man.
The victors get to write history, basically, and like the people who have the loudest voice, often the ones that get heard. There are just people who are just completely unaware and just take things for the face of it. We had a picture of Jesus and a picture of Hannibal, and it was like where these people were born, like in the world, and like what they would have looked like, basically. And it's like these people were born in Turkey, or like they were born in Jerusalem. Like they're all brown people. Like literally, like these people who live in this part of the world. Like you said, whitewashing history, where it's perfectly normal to depict Jesus, who had no business being a white ginger dude. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just, I don't know, man. I don't want to really get into religious all this stuff, but like, I'm just saying, there's a lot of that, and people feel that, and there's people who are completely unaware of any of that stuff even happening.
If you want a true depiction of Jesus, it looks somewhere between me and Sufyan. That's how he would look. I mean, that's it. If Jesus,
had a good fade as well. I've got a decent fade.
I would not have the long greasy hair like him, right?
Yeah.
But if Jesus was around today, they'd be like, "What are you?
Where
are you really from?"
Earlier.
Well, my mom's from Jerusalem. My dad's God. Where are you really from?
Oh, you look so exotic. That's another thing, man. Exotic, like, what am I, a fucking glass of Tropicana? What do you mean, like, exotic? Bongo. Man, it's just, that's another thing. It's just, like I said, like we've said 100 times on this, it's they don't necessarily mean anything bad by it. They're probably even trying to be complimentary, But it's just like exotic, like you're this fucking member of the Amazonian tribe or something. It's just like no, that's not the case. We've covered a lot of the negative, and we have covered some of the positive, but I do want to make sure that I'm being abundantly clear that I'm really taken back actually by the amount of people that I wouldn't really have expected it from as well. There's people who've been particularly vocal on social media, and they've talked out about, it's not just sharing a black square. They've dedicated really their Instagram or their social media outreach to really tackling this issue. And they have literally, quite literally, they don't really, of course, they have skin in the game in the fact that they are a human. We should all be working towards this, this goal of equality. These are people who really do see the issue for what it is, and the fact that it's a human issue. It's not a race issue. It's not anything like that. They see it for what it is, and I'm really being blown back by a lot of that actually.
Yeah, there's definitely such a great sort of wave of allyship coming from this, and that's great. And I mean, I'm not going to be one of those people who is very kind of skeptical or wary of this and say, "Oh, they're just jumping on a bandwagon." Because guess what? That's exactly what we need people to do. We need people to jump on the bandwagon. That's a good thing, right? This is not a trend. It's not the latest Yeezys or something, right? It's not having these conversations and awareness. You don't get change without awareness. And if people are you know, even if people are posting for social brownie points, well, guess what? They're still posting about it. And as long as those, the main thing is that people have these conversations in their real life, right? In their day to day, in the people around them. And that's how we see change. And I think that's the most important thing. So, you know, the allyship I've seen from white people and non-white minorities, like I said, I've seen some amazing posts from my Asian friends who are like, yo, like, we got this problem in our own community and we need to address it. And here's how you talk about anti-black racism with Bangladeshi parents or with Chinese parents or Vietnamese parents. And it's like, cool. Like we're starting to get on the same page about this, man. So I'm loving seeing that. You know, active allyship is, I guess, how you see change eventually, right? It takes time, but you need people to be having these conversations. So with that said, I want to use the recommendations section of this week's show to share with our listeners resources that we've found useful or insightful around the issue of race. And for me, I'm going to recommend the book Natives by Akala. It's a book which I read about a year ago. And for me, I haven't read anything that I felt could have been written by me. I felt some of the stories and some of the opinions and some of the anecdotal experiences that Akala had experienced in his life growing up, I could really relate to. And, you know, he's a mixed race person, I'm a mixed race person, but it spoke more widely about the impact of and legacy of colonization and empire and how that affects people of color in the UK. It's an absolutely amazing book. I've actually bought it for 3 different people in the last year and they've all loved it. And I cannot recommend it highly enough. Natives by Akala.
Awesome, man. I'm definitely going to pick that one up. For me, what I'd like to recommend is it's not necessarily to do with race, more to do with religion, but I think it's a lot of, and you don't necessarily have to be a Muslim to read this book, because I think it touches on a lot of issues that it helps gain a sort of a window into some of the struggles that young Muslims feel growing up in cultures that are very different from the ones that they're taught at home. The book is called Letters to a Young Muslim. And it's by a gentleman called Omar Souph Ghobash. That's spelled Ghobash. What can I say, man? This book is, when I read it, I felt like this guy was literally sitting in a room, like talking to me. Some of the stuff that he told me, I don't really feel like I've really been able to vocalize. I feel like in the back of my head, I felt like some of these issues that I felt, you know, growing up as a Muslim, and you could be in any religion, but if you grow up in a country that, like I said, is, you feel there's like a double life that you have to lead, essentially, in that there's a bunch of stuff that you see outside of your house and there's a bunch of stuff that you see inside of your house that are completely disparate, and you don't necessarily know how to, because of, you know, how juxtaposed these, you know, this way of living is, it makes it very difficult to reconcile the two. And this book does an absolutely fantastic job of speaking to the reader and helping to understand the genesis of some of the issues in the Muslim and Islamic community and what we should be doing in an effort to tackle it. You know, some of the things you said about, you know, racism and that sort of thing existing within Muslim communities. He does, from my memory, he does touch on that. He also touches on like just the mistreatment of women and other things as well, which I think is an absolutely fantastic book. And I'd recommend anybody, particularly if you're Muslim, but you don't necessarily need to be Muslim, to pick this one up. And that's Letters to a Young Muslim by Omar Souph Ghobash.
Thank you, bruv. And we will share these recommendations on social media. We'll put both of them up on the Instagram so you can all see, and hopefully you can pick them up and learn something from them as well. I'm gonna have to check that out.
Man, this book is honestly, man, changed my. I lent it to my mum because I was like, Mum, yeah. I was like, so I read it and I was like, Mum, you need to read this. I was like, because honestly, like, this is the thing. Like, my mum should understand. Like, she grew up in England as a Muslim, as a Moroccan, and she feels, you know, I'm not talking to anybody that's like who's completely unaware of the situation that I'm in, but I think the UK is a very different place to what it was when she was growing up. So she harbors a lot of like different views, I think. And she's like a, you know, a rational person, but I think some of the things in the book, when I was trying to communicate it to her, she was just like, yeah, she even herself, she was like, man, I didn't even see it like, she didn't say man, but she was like, I didn't even see, she didn't even see it like that. And I think it was, man, honestly, highly recommend this book. And I'm going to pick up the Ocala one 100%.
She was like, listen, yeah, I don't see it like that, fam. Blood, you're mad if you think like, I don't
man, you're moving kind of mad, Sufyan, yeah? Talking about fucking letters to a young Muslim.
I'll bang you in your face, blood. You're a dickhead. Now go and make dua before I clap you, fam. What's that, mum?
Yeah.
What's that, mum? Do I have to say it again, fam?
What was that? That fucking freestyle. Crept and Conan, the midnight is.
I missed the roads. Mad thing. We're going out fuckery's happening.
He goes, I actually should have sent money abroad. Give back to my ummah.
I actually should have sent money abroad, gave back to my ummah. But I blame the roads, mad thing. I grew up around fuckeries happening.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in for this week's show. You know, we've covered a lot of difficult subjects and there's a lot going on in the world. And I hope you can use this podcast as a resource for kind of understanding what people in positions different to yours are going through, and also finding some solace in seeing that, you know, other people are going through things similar to you. At the end of the day, we're all kind of in this fight together. And I just hope that everything that comes out of the last week can be used to actually, you know, enact some positive change in the UK, in the US, and all around the world.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, man. I hope that all these movements, I hope it exacts positive change. And for myself, this has been really good for me and quite, like I said, cathartic to talk through some of these things. And hopefully our listeners can, like I said, listen to this and gain insight into a different way of seeing the world, or how, you know, someone else has had a different experience, and hopefully something positive comes out of that as well.
All right, so from me, Lewis.
And from me, Sufyan, I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. Keep your eyes peeled for episode 6 that'll be coming out next week. Peace.
Take care of yourselves.